Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on Football. Where, as you can see, I'm joined by the one and only Miles Garrett. The one and only Miles
The
Garrett.
one and only, the
That's
one
right.
and only. Yeah, it's spelled correctly, I might add.
Miles, how are you now that we live in a totally different Falcons world than we lived in 5 days ago?
Yeah, just when you think the off-season honeymoon is in full effect, Joe, it seems like that took a quick turn going back to reality. So, Matt Ryan and Kevin Stefanski, Ian Cunningham, Arthur Blank, they all have their hands full all of a sudden when we thought that it was just nothing but positive news lately. So it seems like we had a wrench thrown in that just a hair.
I know. It's very, the press conferences that they've done so far, I consider those the easy ones where you can
Oh yeah.
prepare for
Mhm.
them. They're basically good news that you're announcing and it's kind of happy and smiles. And that's not what Saturday night was, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring Miles onto the show today in particular is because we actually got our paths crossed on that Saturday night when all of this was happening, and Miles was delivering the news to Atlanta on his Fox 5 evening broadcast. I just so happened to be kind of hanging out with some media people by circumstance, and um, I got it like on my phone, and I'm obviously, I'm with people who are kind of in this world, so we're all discussing it. I just kind of wanted, because I wasn't with you at that time. Like, what was your reaction? How did it unfold for you when you're over at Fox 5 seeing the news?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because that night, it was a relatively slow news night per se. My lead that night was the report that Kirk Cousins was actually going to be released this offseason. So I
Mm,
figured that would be my lead. I kind of go into some NBA, some Hawks, kind of do the easy stuff and then get on out of there. But then all of a sudden, I believe it was, I want to say around 9 o'clock when we got the information that all this changed, and it kept, the thing was, Joe, it just kept happening. Like, you
yes.
saw the initial tweet from Mark Ramondi, a guy that we both work very close with, does excellent work over at ESPN. But it was the initial report. Then you saw the video come up, and then it was, there was all this additional stuff that went along with it. So it was a really fluid situation. Still kind of seems to be just a hair of a fluid situation, but at the time, especially when all that stuff was going down, it just seemed like one new piece of information was coming through each hour. So it was definitely an interesting night, especially considering that he was a nominee, pretty
Yeah.
good contention, I would say, for defensive rookie of the year. And to have his mom up there on stage talking about how great a man he's become, this kind of stuff. Obviously, we know there'd been a lot of character concerns with James Pearce Jr. coming out of college, but he's maintained very good, for lack of a better term, I'd say behavior, I guess, over the past year. But yeah, this kind of hit pretty quick, didn't it?
The news kept trickling out and none of it was good. Like
No,
it
it
was
got
just it
worse
was
and
just
worse.
it was like it was almost comical and like how bad it was getting. Like just like every it felt like every new piece of news like, "Oh my gosh." Like it just like got either
Mm,
I don't want to make light of the situation, just like more violent or like more
yeah.
it's just like kind of, just realized how
Mm,
deep of a hole he is in and will be in for the foreseeable future. And I want to, you mentioned him like kind of, having been what seems to be on the straight and narrow for the season. And I think that's where like maybe we can offer some insight to people. Like, I mean, we talked to James several times over the course of
mhm.
the season, and never had an issue with him. Really, I have heard some stories of like requests being declined or things like that, but that's
Sure.
normal.
Mm,
But it's I think it's tough for some of these guys when they get away from the facility, which seems to be the case in this instance, where it seems like when James had this regiment of coming into the building, being around his teammates and the support system that he had in Flowery Branch, that he was fine. But then one thing happens, and you get away from all of that, and yeah, and it starts to change. And so you know, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but like I didn't see this coming. Let me say that
mm.
because I felt like all of our interactions were always very professional.
Yeah, for as far as professional interactions go, the only thing I would say in regards to James is yes, he was absolutely courteous. He didn't give you the longest answers, I would say.
Oh
When you
yeah.
speak to him, got a little bit better throughout the season, but especially early on when he started, it'd be tough to get a soundbite out of him. It was funny because we'd interview him and Jalen Walker pretty hand in hand there, obviously being the two first round rookies there, and it was just sort of a night and day difference. I always thought with sort of the comments, how they'd answer questions. I remember Jalen Walker, all the teammates and the coaches. Raheem Morris at the time was like, "Who's a future captain on this team?" It's Jalen Walker, and you could see it obviously with those answers. Again, not to take anything away from James, but that was sort of the difference in how those two responded. But yeah, I mean, you look back at last offseason, I keep going back to the character concerns that were coming in with him that again we just didn't see it or haven't seen. So this is why it's coming as a surprise to us. I've seen a lot of different reports out there. Zach Klein at WSB, talking about how he got some text messages from some sources within the NFL that were like, yeah, I mean, we saw this coming. This was all in his
Hmm.
character concerns sheet. Some teams had him off their draft board completely because of it. And look, I mean, this is a guy, you saw what he did last year. He was generally considered, I believe, before his rookie season or before his last season at Tennessee, was considered to be a almost consensus top 3, if not number 1 overall type prospect in that draft. So the fact that he fell the way he did and potentially was going to fall more kind of seems to indicate that those reports, when there's smoke, there's fire. And unfortunately, it looks like some of that has come to fruition.
Yeah, and I gotta say, like, in light of that, it doesn't really, shine a positive light upon Terry Fontenot, where there were already misgivings from Falcons
Mm,
fans about, his tenure and the way that things went. And then to see this obviously being like a crucial, draft pick, but also just the
mm,
move in general to make the move to trade up to get this player, who may not play for you ever again. He may have played his last snap as an Atlanta Falcon. I certainly think that, but we don't know that for
mm.
certain. But yeah, and especially considering going into that draft, because the Falcons were in the market for an edge rusher, right? So a lot of
Of
Falcons were
course,
like
yeah.
kind of keeping tabs on all these guys who were in the combine, and
No doubt. Yeah.
because
It was
every
almost
like
it was almost just that, I believe, for the first round.
yeah, yeah, and lots of players through this pre-draft process have issues, and then for the as it relates to the Falcons, I know like James Pearce Jr. and Mike Green, those were the two
Yep.
players who had super high upside, a lot of potential in those two players, but they both had these red flags, and then we didn't get you never get the clear cut answer on like
Mhm.
how the team felt about these players, but it seemed to me like they actually did have the red flag on Mike Green,
Mhm.
but not
Yep.
necessarily on James Pearce Jr., who also, if I'm just to kind of speculate, seemed to be like the player they thought they were going to get with the
Mm.
15th pick. When Jalen Walker then appears,
Yes.
you have to take a player like that, and then
Mm.
they make the trade to get back up. But in a different world, this could have been their only first round pick that this happens to, and just totally, I guess, misreading the red flags, or I don't know, maybe just like not giving them enough weight.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit the nail right in the head when talking about, if Jalen Walker wasn't there, because I, along with many others, I feel like, maybe including the Falcons, was very surprised that he fell to pick number 15. So I think it was one of those situations where the original strategy was, like you said, to draft James Pearce Jr. and Jalen Walker just too good to pass up in that scenario. But yeah, I mean, going back to Terry Fontenot, yes, he had a phenomenal draft. I'll give him credit for that. Just on the field, what happened? James Pearce, Jalen Walker, Xavier Watts, Billy Bowman. It was a great draft class. But
Hmm.
you look at the last 2 years, first round wise, you haven't gotten a lot of production out of it. That includes Michael Penix Jr. That was your guy you took in the first round. Hasn't seen the field a whole lot. James Pearce Jr. Now you sacrifice this year's first round pick for it. Those are going to bite you in the butt. And obviously, he ultimately paid the price for it. Getting let go by the Falcons. You have a new general manager in there, but this is really bad on the way out because it really kind of adds on to the fact that, yeah, the last two first rounders so far, you don't want to rule out on Michael Penix Jr. yet, but so far haven't necessarily paid off.
I want to ask you about like if you're in Ian Cunningham's seat, does this kind of change the way that you go forward? Especially like let's just focus on the draft because they could
Mhm.
always spend free agent money. However, um, and I don't know. I think before we get to that question, we have to talk a little bit about like what we think is going to happen to James Pearce Jr. through all of this. And I've seen a lot of people who have kind of downplayed it a little bit, like not downplaying like the morality of the situation and the
Sure.
crimes, but just saying like these things they get pled down. They never will face the full extent of the maximal charges that they
Mhm.
face when they're initially made, but in this case, while yes, I do expect some of the charges to probably come down, this is going to be kind of a public trial when you consider the victim in this case is not just some person that is unknown to the public, that wouldn't kind of have a lot of that public sympathy that, a professional athlete has. It's a professional athlete in her own right, and someone who's going
Mm.
to garner a lot of sympathy and I just feel like that is not going to help James Pearce Jr. or I say the Falcons just because they have this association with James Pearce, even though this is a James Pearce Jr.
Mm.
legal situation. But I feel like that's going to make it a lot more difficult to kind of get the better end of the consequences of this.
Yeah, and it's a bummer that we have to even say that, but you're absolutely right. It's true. Just the court of public opinion when it comes to, things that are caught on video, things that aren't caught on video. Obviously, his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend rather being a WNBA
Yeah.
player, that comes with its own audience, no doubt. So that certainly is another thing. But Joe, I really think the biggest thing with this, which I think is a difference, unfortunately, again, that I have to say, in suspensions or, when he might see the field again, because you're right. You've seen so many instances in the past where, the legal situation kind of sorts itself out ish enough to where he's allowed back on the field and, it's a 6 to 10 game suspension, whatever it might be. The thing that's going to hurt James and obviously in hand the Atlanta Falcons is going to be the hitting the police officer. That's
Yes.
that
Yep.
that's a whole other box of issues that this whole case opens up, because again, with everything that happens with the girlfriend, there's video that can be, taken back, charges that can be dropped.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing with the police officer is on the record stated. It's there was an injury hitting a police officer. That is going to bring its whole other set of things that, I think we've seen the charges now. 5-year minimum prison sentence if found guilty. So there's a lot of things at play here. Obviously, don't want to speak to an ongoing investigation, but that,
Yep.
of course, being a big one. My dad, a former police officer himself, I've asked him a lot about some of these charges, and he kind of implies, yeah, it's that one doesn't look good for him. That's
Yeah.
a big one.
Yeah, I totally agree with you for the exact reason that like the charges are not really going to be dropped of that, and there's probably body cam footage or footage
Yep.
that we haven't seen that the police will have in being able to like use in their prosecution of this case. And you're right, like listen, neither of us are lawyers. Want to put that out there,
Sure.
obviously.
Yep.
I'm not even going to make my
Smart.
normal joke about having slept in a Holiday Inn Express either, because it's this is too serious for that. I would never make that joke, but
Of course. Of course.
no. Yeah, but I mean, like, are you back in the market basically for an edge rusher at this point? The Falcons do have some options, when you look at, well, first of all, the fact that they double dipped last year, and then they also have a guy like Braylon Trice who hasn't really played yet. So I don't know. What are you thinking here? And let's just assume that James Pearce Jr. is like probably not going to play this year.
Mm.
And by the way, we should just assume like he's basically
Right.
not on the team right now.
Yeah, I would assume as well. And it's tough, right? Because we don't exactly know what Ian Cunningham's official strategy is going to be. He's given us sort of hints. We've seen the press conference. We've seen where he's coming from, that being, some of the best general managers of this generation. Ozzie Newsome, Howie Roseman, and now Ryan Poles creating what he's doing up there in Chicago. You can assume that maybe he's going to implement sort of the same strategies, but at the same time, it's also a very unique situation because you do look at the Falcons as a whole. Yes, James Pearce gave you 10.5 sacks, but other guys got there too. And you do have some other, on paper, I would say, glaring needs that you would assume you'd need to take care of first before addressing the pass rushing need. Because like you said, there is some hope for optimism, obviously, with what you have in Jalen Walker. He, could be potentially put more in a pass rush type situation. I think we saw a lot with Jalen was he was sort of all over the field, sort of their rover linebacker. So maybe they switch up his role. We haven't seen Braylon Trice yet. It's been 2 years. And man, let me tell you, one of the luckiest guys. Again, you hate to say it in this situation because it's not lucky whatsoever, but a guy like Arnold Ebiketie, because all of a sudden you're right back in contention for this role where before maybe you were a cut candidate. Who knows? This is now a situation where Arnold can maybe step in and contribute to this Jeff Ulbrich defense because, yes, we saw him in spot duty, but he wasn't necessarily the type of starter role that we saw a guy like James Pearce. So all these different factors at play, whether or not you re-sign a guy like Caden Ellis, all that, Leonard Floyd, you name it, some decisions that are going to have to be made on the defensive front. It's going to be a tough call. So I wish I knew. I haven't had a draft of Ian Cunningham or a free agency period to kind of judge on what he might do.
It's an unfair question to ask because honestly, none of us can say with any certainty, like at all, like what the Falcons are going to do, not just at this position, but any position. Like we don't have enough of a sample of Ian Cunningham more than, what he said at his press conference, which we'll get to in a second. I do want to add as it relates to the edge room. I think that the Falcons will need to not just look at the like replacing the production or the production side of it, the sacks, etc. Like because you mentioned, there's other players that have
Mhm.
produced to that in that realm. But I think it's actually just like the actual like style of play, like the
Mhm.
archetype of the player who's this
Yeah.
edge player who's really athletic and dynamic, and that's where I think Arnold Ebiketie is much more of that profile of an edge defender than a Braylon
Mhm.
Trice. Braylon Trice to me has always
Correct.
struck me as more of a power like a power edge, good
Hmm.
against the run. You get what you get against the pass, but it
Hmm.
feels like they need a more kind of like dynamic athlete at that other edge position. Jalen Walker can potentially be that guy. He's got some of those
Sure.
natural football skills, so maybe we do see
Mhm.
him being used in some different ways.
Yeah, and again, like I said, maybe a guy like Leonard Floyd comes back, and
Yep.
I know he's a little bit on the older side as well, but yeah, I mean, again, I'd have to take a look at honestly the free agent class for edge rushers. I'm not too familiar with it at this point, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, because that's really what James Pearce. Well, it was almost seeing the night and day difference between him and Jalen, because
Mm-hmm.
Jalen was that do everything guy, whereas almost like James was your designated job, just get to the quarterback. Like that is
Mm-hmm.
what your purpose is on this defense, and he did it very well. That's obviously why we thought we found the solution to this pass rush issue, with all these different guys sort of fitting in these roles. And you've got some guys who are now filling in on the defensive line now, outside of that, sort of guys that are setting that up with Ruka Rororo and the emergence of Brandon Dorless this past year. I mean, talk about a guy that was having sack numbers out of nowhere was Brandon
Yeah.
Dorless. The guy I
Yeah.
think he, at one point was leading the team in sacks. So I think it is a defense where certain guys set each other up, and Dorless had his injury. He's gonna have to come back, and hopefully he's back to return to form like he was this past year. But yeah, man, it's a tough call right now. I wouldn't want to be in Ian Cunningham's shoes, especially given the fact you don't have a first round pick to work with this year.
Yeah, no first round pick. And then you've got some key decisions to make on guys, forget like the free agents that are going to be out there, but the guys who are free agents that were on your team who you might want to bring back, and
Kyle
one.
Pitts.
Yeah, Kyle Pitts, absolutely. I think in this, we're talking about the edge room. Caden Ellis, I know he's an inside linebacker, but he can give you some pass rush. With
Mm-hmm.
the Saints, he was in a 3 point stance at times on the edge, and he's got some of the best win rates in that respect. And I'm
Look
just
what happened when
curious.
you let go of Nate Landman. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
some of these guys, that you might be having some dogs on your team that you don't even realize yet.
yeah,
So
for
it's
sure.
tough.
For sure. So we prior to all this James Pearce Jr. stuff, we had some pretty interesting things happening with the Falcons, where they have Matt Ryan named to this new president of football role, and then he hires Kevin Stefanski and Ian Cunningham. These are obviously like major shakeup in the front office, and what I call like the sporting side of the Falcons when you include like the front office people plus Kevin Stefanski and the coaching staff. And so, Miles, I just want to kind of get your opinion on whether you think that if you think these are good decisions, bad decisions to hire some of these guys, and maybe what you expect to see from this Falcons team as they go forward from here, because it feels like a different kind of identity they're trying to establish.
Yeah, obviously very loaded, right? Because this starts back, when Matt was basically the first hire in this whole process. When Arthur Blank said, "Look, the biggest issue that Sportsology Group found with this franchise was the fact that it seemed to lack direction." And obviously, that starts at the top. When you go back to the past few seasons, has it been a mix-up of order with Rich McKay, with Terry Fontenot, with all the way up to Arthur Blank? It seemed like there were a lot of different, for lack of a better term, cooks in the kitchen when it comes to that with the Atlanta Falcons. So I think these moves sort of set a new precedent for how this team is going to be run. We have these roles. We have Matt, head of football, just what happens on the grass, GM, head coach. All these guys are aligned in the same process, essentially. So bouncing off of that,
Yeah.
it seems like the fan base has been very, very split, if not more on the negative side, in my opinion, on Kevin Stefanski. I have found, again,
Hmm.
Twitter's not a real place, X, whatever you want to call it today. It's not real, and it doesn't represent every fan. But based on the large interaction I've seen on that group, it appears that he is not very popular. And a lot of that has to do with the 8 wins in 2 seasons. I get that on paper. I hear you. That makes sense. When you look back at what maybe Raheem Morris has done the last 2 years and compare it. So that's valid. But what it seems like isn't being looked at or even discredited, I think, to a certain degree, is the two-time coach of the year thing and what he was able to do with a Cleveland Browns team that, frankly, without him, has not reached the playoffs this entire millennium. So, and obviously you're seeing the dysfunction that's continuing on there with
Yeah.
this past coaching surge, with coaches refusing to even interview there, and the fiasco now that's going on with Jim Shorts, leaving the team, feeling that he got bypassed for Todd Monken. So we all kind of knew this, I think. I don't think it's breaking news that the Cleveland Browns are a dysfunctional organization, but I do think that there was something to the fact that this team wanted to have a head coach who was experienced, outside of Raheem Morris, because, it'd been so long since he was a head coach, right? It was almost like that time of him as being a head coach was discredited because it was like, okay, like that's kind of a mulligan, was it a real shot, that type of deal? You look outside of Raheem, this team and Arthur Blank has never really taken a shot on a guy that has been a head coach in the league before. Arthur Smith, Mike Smith, Dan Quinn, Jim Mora, all these different guys. Bobby Petrino had never done it at the NFL level. All these guys had been either coordinators or, younger type guys. I know Mike Smith, not necessarily that guy, but at the same time, maybe it was a breath of fresh air to have a voice in there that knows how to get it done, that knows how to get to the playoffs, mind you, with dysfunction, with four different starting quarterbacks, with 40-year-old Joe Flacco. So I think that there is something to the fact that this guy can coach and he was in high demand. I do think that John Harbaugh was the priority for this team. I think he was the priority for every team in the league at that point. So I'm sure the Falcons did their due diligence in getting him. Obviously being a Super Bowl winner, but outside of that, it seemed like Kevin Stefanski was also the top candidate outside of John Harbaugh. It seemed like every team wanted to interview him. So I get the Clint Kubiak hype. It seemed like he was sort of the favorite for the Falcons and what fans seem to want. But speaking to some different, former players, I know a guy who used to play with the Vikings who played under Stefanski and Kubiak, essentially said they're the same guy. And reports have sort of indicated that as well. I've seen the same thing online. They come from the same system, the same tree, apples and oranges, whatever you want to call it. Clint Kubiak, of course, did a phenomenal job in Seattle, but I really think this is a pretty good hire. And then, sorry, long-winded answer
No,
there,
all
but
good. This is great. Yeah.
going to Ian Cunningham,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's also another guy who seemed to be the favorite from the start. It seemed like
Mm-hmm.
as soon as Matt Ryan got there, the rumorville was, oh, it's going to be Ian Cunningham. Of course, he's Ryan Poles' guy in Chicago. Obviously, the Matt Ryan connection going back to Boston College. And look, this is a guy that's absolutely earned this job. I mean, you look at his credentials. We mentioned them earlier. He has learned under quite possibly the best GMs of the last 20 years. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, talking about credentials and doing your time, I think Ian Cunningham is right up there with the best. It seemed like it came down between him and former Georgia Tech linebacker James Lippert. So I was kind of surprised to see him get there. It almost seemed like Josh Williams with the 49ers was the other guy to sort of pay attention to, but ultimately it looked like it was those two. But yeah, no surprises there. It seemed like he was the favorite from the start, and I think he's going to be good. It looked like he's earned this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. That's a great breakdown of kind of the situation here for the Falcons. And I got to say, it feels to me like this is, Matt Ryan. I think we all understand that Matt Ryan is going to have like certain preferences and kind of like idealizes an organization in a certain way that is something that, he is familiar with. And when I see these hires, I mean, it less so on the GM side of it, but like on the
Mm.
coaching side of it, to me, I really see like parallels between Kevin
Oh
Stefanski
yeah,
and Mike Smith.
big time.
Even though they weren't like Mike Smith is a defensive coach, Kevin Stefanski is an offensive coach. I think from Matt Ryan's perspective, he sees both of these guys as head coaches who are very well prepared. The first word that he used to describe like this Falcons identity was detailed, and I continue to think that that is something that really frustrated him last year watching this team. I've said it on this show, Miles, that when I kind of had a bit of a breaking point, like with my feelings about Raheem. It was when I asked him about why he chose to receive the kickoff in overtime of that game against the Colts, and he said it was because he wanted the ball and stuff. But like, it's just this strategic misdecision.
I will never forget being in Germany and down there because I was filming the game on the field and talking to my other cameraman out there, and because I thought I was crazy. I was like, I'm not nuts, right? Like that,
Right.
you're not supposed to do that. Like I'm literally being like, you won the toss. Am I missing something? Did I miss a detail out here on the field? I will never forget that because I was just as puzzled as you were at that point.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's little things that kind of, I mean, again, you look back at what Matt Ryan said, as little as the Dolphins coming to town and saying it's raining outside, it's cold outside. The Dolphins are horrendous at playing in that way. Again, this is such a extreme example of this,
Sure.
but it's stuff that you don't think about, right? I mean, it's simple. You have a open air stadium. Why not use that? Use it to
Mhm.
your advantage. Just little things that it seemed like Matt was looking at to where he was, and you also go back to his approach on preseason football. I remember we spoke to him about that and Raheem at length about playing starters and everything. Matt Ryan always, three games. You got to get up to speed. Like it's necessary. It's very very necessary for these guys. And you contrast to that with what Raheem was saying. Like they're ready. They're getting those reps in practice, and you'd believe them at face value. Then they'd always start off the gate real slow. So the question always begs and remains the same as saying, okay, well it seems like this is proving you wrong out there. Either your strategy isn't good or these guys are not ready. So
Mhm.
which one is it? Because it can't be both. So I think was a big point of reference for those small little details.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I think we're gonna see a very different looking Falcons team, not just with the way they play, but maybe even the way they look with the new uniforms. So that
As
should
you
be
can
exciting.
see, yes, I am
The red
very
helmet.
pro new unis. It's been a long time coming for this team. But one additional thing, Joe, I want to
Yeah,
mention.
yeah.
You look. I think we were talking about Matt Ryan. Being the type of guy that wanted to sort of emulate what he had. Back when he was a rookie quarterback and getting started with this team and whatever set him up for success. I think the big difference now is you see the experience level of coaching that he's relying on. You go back to 2008, you had Mike Mularkey as his offensive coordinator. You had a lot of these guys that were not first time play callers. They knew how to utilize and help out a young quarterback. You can say what you will about Mike Mularkey, the head coach, but going just strictly coordinator type roles that brings a wealth of experience. You bring in Bill Callahan, arguably the best offensive line coach you could bring out there on your to coach a group that's pretty solid for the most part.
Can you get in the Hall of Fame by being like a position coach? I don't know.
I
I
think
honestly
he
don't know if you
should.
can, but I think like he would be one of those guys. Like if
Oh
it's
yeah, no
possible,
doubt. I
yeah,
think I think he's earned it. But
yeah.
you look at other guys like Tanner Engstrand, a passing game coordinator. He has offensive coordinator experience, passing game coordinator experience with the Lions. Seems like Jets fans have given him a mulligan for what happened as OC up there in New York. Tommy Reese, say what you will. He's been an offensive coordinator in the league before. He's done it in Cleveland, that type of thing. So he's gotten that level of experience, which I think is so valuable to a rookie quarterback. And Matt Ryan mentioned it at length, especially with what Kevin Stefanski said, talking about his philosophy as a head coach. It's play action. It's running the ball. It's setting up the young quarterback to have a guy like Michael Turner or Bijan Robinson there in the backfield to utilize him and set that rookie quarterback up for success, building his confidence and having stuff ready downfield. Yes, he's going to have to get under center. I think that's just going to be a reality of the situation with Michael Penix Jr. Don't know how that'll work out, but it seems like there's a system in place now to sort of guide him along a little bit better than a first-time coordinator in Zach Robinson, a first-time coordinator in Jimmy Lake, guys that you didn't quite know what their roles were on the offensive coaching staff. With what was TJ Yates coaching the receivers? Was he coaching the quarterbacks? It was
Yeah,
a lot of different moving parts there, it seemed. So
yeah.
it looks like now, like we go back to the original point, there's a direction now for this franchise.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to say one thing about the Tommy Reese situation. Well, I felt like it was just getting like dumped on completely, like with
Yeah.
him. First of all, being named the OC, and then even more like when they revealed that he was going to be calling plays. And I'm not saying that he's going to be great.
Mhm.
But I'm also not saying like he's going to be terrible. Like
Mhm.
I think that like we just should just have an open mind about this and just see basically how it goes. But like I kind of compare him to Zach Robinson, who like when he was announced he was hired, I was like, oh my gosh, what a coup for the Falcons. They got
Sean
this
McVay tree.
the Sean McVay tree, the next wonderkind play caller, et cetera, et cetera. But he never called plays, of course. We all just assume that because he had all these he was in this position, et cetera, that he was going to be good. But it kind of goes to the point about Clint Kubiak. And again, I think Clint Kubiak's going to be a great coach.
Yeah.
But to me, there's like something about it's like that mystery box thing from Family Guy where it's
Who's really
like
responsible?
right, exactly. You
Mhm.
can get a coach that might be great, or you can get a coach who has any sort of track record. But it seems like anyone with any sort of track record is almost always going to have some blemishes on that track record,
Of
and
course,
then
yeah.
those just kind of get focused upon by
Everybody.
fans,
Yeah.
really noticing that. I wanted to wrap this up, Miles, with just I didn't tell you about this, some like superlatives, just like some like kind of quick fire
Oh, cool.
questions
Let's do
to
it.
kind of bring people in behind the scenes. So
Mhm.
I'm talking about when you're interviewing players, a Falcons player, who's the funniest Falcons player that you've
Ooh,
come
the
across?
funniest?
Yeah,
Ooh, that's a good one. Hold on, let me
yeah.
think. The funniest player. Um, oh man, I'm
There
like
are
trying
some,
to.
there are yeah.
There's
So
a few different characters in there.
I'll throw out Cordero Patterson,
I was
even though
about to say him.
yeah,
I was
even though he
about to
could be
say Cordell
cantankerous,
Patterson.
sometimes he was in a mood and he didn't want to talk at all. But like if
He
he
was
was,
right on the tip of my tongue. I was about to
yeah,
say, if I
yeah,
have to say anybody, he was because he liked to interact with us a decent bit.
yeah.
Um, Hold on, I'm trying to think of one so I'm not a complete jerk here. I'm gonna say who was a good one? Who was a good one? Come on, Miles. Heineke had his moments, I'll say.
Yes, he was great. Yeah, he wore his Bush
Yeah.
Light hoodie into a.
Yeah, the Bush Light hoodie, that was a good one. Yeah, the defensive backs, not so much.
Yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, I'd probably go with Cordero
I
Patterson
feel like it's
if I had to
usually
pick one.
yeah.
Because
Maybe
just going back from the
Caleb
last few
McGarry can
years.
also be funny sometimes. He can like throw out some like weird line where it's just like what the hell?
He picks and chooses when he wants to be funny because when he
Right.
is, he's very funny. If not, he won't talk at all.
Yeah,
So I think
exactly,
that's a little
exactly.
bit of
So,
Caleb
that's how
McGarry,
it is with the funny guys. Like they're
right?
either funny or they're like not in the mood
Yeah,
to talk.
they never are, and it's like, all right,
So
we'll go away.
for guys who are in the mood, who's like the nicest or easiest interview that a player that you like talking to?
Bijan Robinson, zero
That's
hesitation.
what I had.
Zero
That's what I had.
hesitation.
Which is
It's not even
crazy.
close.
It's
It's
crazy.
not even
He's
close.
like the biggest superstar in the NFL. He's also like one of the nicest guys in that locker
Oh yeah,
room.
like he will take time to like know who you are and like if he can't speak to you, he will be the nicest and apologetic about it and
Yeah.
he'll like after like it was always noticeable to me after losses because he would sit there and answer every single question, sometimes with even a smile on his face just to show that he was being courteous, like to not give
Mhm.
off the vibe that he was trying to be a jerk or, wasn't trying to answer the question the way you wanted. So no, without a doubt, I'd say Bijan. He was awesome.
The one anecdote I'll tell that I couldn't believe it happened. It was his rookie year, and his rookie year that was their last year in that old locker room. So they had to come out of the door.
Yes.
There was like a
Hmm.
little door that they would come out of, and they would
Mm.
media were set up right outside there in a little scrum setting. And so usually, and then when the player was done talking, usually the player would the media would wait for the player to be the first one in, and then the media would kind of follow him.
Mm.
Bijan goes over, he finishes his media, which he like always goes way too long because he's like taking every single question, and then he goes to the door and just opens it up, and just holds it, and like for all the media to like walk in, and people are
It's like
like, "Oh,
you
thank
can't
you,
do that.
Bijan." Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Like after
Yeah,
you,
you can do
please.
that.
That's this.
No,
Like,
it was. I mean, here's I guess one little story I have of Bijan. We just remember his rookie year. We had a an intern who went to Texas, and she was friends with Bijan at the time, and didn't know how the procedure necessarily goes when it comes to interviewing players out there on the field. But it was funny
this is in
because
training camp, right?
yes,
Yep,
yes,
I
I'm
remember
sure a lot
this.
of folks remember it because it was in front of everybody. But I remember as Bijan was walking toward the locker room, our intern ran up and said, "Hey, Bijan," gave him a hug, and he was like, "Oh, it's so good to see you." This, that, and everyone was panicking, and the Falcons brass was panicking, like, "Who is this? Who is this? Who is this?" And I'm like, "So we're sorry. It's just doing another protocol." And like Bijan's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, my bad." I'm like, "It's okay. It's okay. You're just a really nice guy."
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, and I feel like I'm not criticizing Falcons, here, but like I just feel like they gotta like almost protect him from himself from like being
Yeah,
pulled in so many directions because
correct.
he's a guy who never wants to say no to anybody because he's
Of
so
course.
nice and just like generous with his time and energy, and so I kind of feel for him in some
Mm.
respects that like he has so many people who kind of want something from him, and he's only one person, so he can only be one place. Last one is so you just kind of wrapped up. I don't know if I even mentioned this off the top, but you've wrapped up your time at Fox 5 Atlanta, which was an epic run, and I know you'll have a lot more coming for us later. And I just wanted to know, kind of like, what was your, if there's one lasting memory that you have. I guess I would say, like, if it's Falcons related, that would be great. But
Sure.
anything that kind of stands out from your time covering pro sports here.
Well, before I get into the Falcons related, it's really tough to not say my first year a World Series championship, my first 2 years back-to-back college national championships. I was like, man, I clearly was the thing that was missing here because I started off real hot with three championships just right off the gate. But no, I mean it's tough not to say those two. Those
Yeah.
ones were incredible to cover, especially going out to LA for the NLCS. But Falcons related, I got to travel the world with this team, man. Like, I mean, I got to go to Berlin and see what they did there. Again, not all of these resulted in wins, of course, but it was cool to kind of cover them and with in depth as we did. We're at Fox 5's the partner station of the Atlanta Falcons, so we got a lot of one-on-one time with these guys. Got to really, get to know them as players, as coaches. Get to really speak to them, on terms that was really outside of work on occasion. So it was kind of cool to dig past the, just what you see at face value. You see what fans say sometimes that, you kind of understand how they feel, because, you speak to them all the time. You know who they are as people. And I think that was a big thing, not necessarily that I learned, but, to just see firsthand that, man, they're people just like everybody else.
Yep.
They're out there trying to do a job. They're really good at it, obviously, but to the degree of knowing who they are. But the from just a memory standpoint, loved going to training camp. I mean, I grew up here in Atlanta, grew up watching the Atlanta Falcons. My first year here, covering Matt Ryan as the quarterback. Still, back when I was a kid watching him. Tough not to say that was pretty cool as a person who grew up here. That was sort of a big time full circle moment for me, no doubt.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And by the way, for any young aspiring journalists, to Miles' point, the quicker you can get over seeing players as like these kind of mythical, figures who are larger than life, and kind of realize that they're just people, and they're
Mm.
probably actually in a press setting more intimidated to be
Oh
talking to
yeah.
you than you are of them. Keep that in mind for any young journalists. And once you kind of get over that barrier, you start asking a lot better questions. You're able to kind of think on your feet a
Mm.
lot more, and be able to kind of like really have dialogue with players instead of kind
Mm.
of having canned things to say. But Miles, that's going to do it for us. Is there anything you wanted to plug at this point in time? I know that, like I said, you just wrapped up your time at Fox 5 Atlanta. It sounds like you're not maybe ready yet, but I'll tell people that there's more to come from Miles, and I know I'm looking forward to it. But you got anything?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I'm without officially naming it, I am launching my own content, my own website. I've already been posting videos on my Instagram, X, TikTok, you name it. Miles Garrett TV with an I, not a Y. That's basically where I post everything. So you'll be seeing some more content, Atlanta specific sports content out of me very soon. I'm not going anywhere yet.
Good, good, and I hope that we'll be hearing some of that back on Joe Patrick on football soon enough. Here, I'm sure we'll catch back up with you and others when training camp rolls around. We're gonna have the draft. There's gonna be exciting times. NFL season never ends. So, Miles, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll talk to you next time. Next time there's something interesting to talk about. That's hopefully not
Yeah, hopefully not
prior
this.
player getting arrested. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Miles, and for everybody else, we'll talk to you soon.